Thank you. Welcome. I'm calling the meeting of Assembly Committee on Education to order. We will first call roll. So members, as your name is called, please unmute yourself and say here or present. Will the secretary please call roll?
Assemblywoman Duran.
Here.
Assemblyman Flores.
Present.
Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hanson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hardy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Krasner.
Here.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman MacArthur.
Here.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Wynn.
Here.
Assemblywoman Tolles.
Here.
Assemblywoman Torres.
Here.
Chair Bilbray Axelrod.
Here. And please note for the record that we do have a quorum. Welcome to everyone who is attending online. We're going to go over a few housekeeping things. If you haven't done so already, make sure you mute yourself on your microphone so when you're not speaking to minimize background noise. Additionally, committee members, please keep your cameras on for the duration of the meeting to ensure a quorum is present. We have our materials available on Nellis. There was a little bit of an issue with some possible copyright issues, so at least one of the presentations will just have the first page, and then we can email you the remainder, and we will have that taken care of in the future. As I've said, I really want to make sure the public has all the information that the legislators are looking at as well. Other thing that I wanted to bring up that because we're doing this digital, a lot of us have multiple monitors going on so we can look at exhibits as well as the camera and type. So if it looks like we're not paying attention or something or looking away, believe me, we're just looking at another monitor, such as 2020 in the legislative session. Most meetings will do public comment at both the beginning and end of the meeting. However, today we'll only have public comment at the end of the meeting to ensure that one of our presenters is available for questions. Before we begin, I did not introduce my attaché at the last meeting, Matthew Fonken. He has been my attaché in the last legislative session, and I don't know what I'd do without him. So if you call my office or email me, and whenever the building opens, if you see he is the face at the front of my office, and so feel free to reach out to him to get to me. And thank you, Matthew, for everything you've done thus far and will continue to do for me. So today we have two presentations. We're going to have a presentation from the Nevada Association of School Superintendents, and they will talk about the INVEST report. And we'll also have a presentation on school district response to the COVID-19 pandemic and schools reopening plans from the school district superintendents and the State Public Charter School Authority. With that, let's get started with our first presentation on the INVEST report. We have Dr. Summer Stevens, Dr. Dave Jensen, and Wayne Workman. Take it away.
Oh, sorry, I was talking and I realized I was on mute. You'd think in 10 months we'd have it figured out. Again, good afternoon, Chairwoman Bilbray Axelrod and members of the Assembly Education Committee. I'm Dr. Summer Stevens. I'm the Superintendent of Churchill County School District and the Acting Vice President of the Nevada Association of School Superintendents. And as you stated, we have with us today Dr. Dave Jensen, Superintendent of Humboldt County School District, and Mr. Wayne Workman, past President of NASS and Superintendent of Lyon County. I wanted to take a couple of minutes just to share a little bit more about NASS, and then we'll jump into our document. The Nevada Association of School Superintendents is a statewide organization that supports our 17 school districts and the state charter school authorities leaders, impacting over 720 schools in our great state. Our purpose is to take action through leadership, training, support, and advocacy to ensure the highest quality of education for all students in Nevada. Today, we share with you our INVEST priorities as a common single voice from NAS. At times, we know that we have divergent needs and visions, so at those times, we do not speak as a whole, but today we come to you with our common voice and our common need related to these INVEST priorities. In the last 10 months, school districts have had to completely rethink operations in light of the global pandemic. This crisis has brought a particular focus to the role of school districts and what they play for students and our communities, providing access to essential functions from learning to safety to nutrition and many, many other things. As such, we articulate today key priorities that must be realized moving forward, including streamlining, connecting, and funding. One priority of NAS includes streamlining. Not during this time of extremely strained and stressed educational systems, nor in any time moving forward, can we afford to have our staff and students have wasting time and energy on non-essential, often unfunded requirements. As such, NASC is asking for the following. We're asking for the elimination of and the prohibition of any and all unfunded mandates and any legislation that is repetitive, focused on interests that are out of line with our necessary laser-like focus on learning, the Nevada statewide plan of improvement, and the well-being of children and staff. This will allow our educators and our staff to focus their time, their energy, and their resources on serving student needs instead of complying with state laws, which we will, by the way, comply with, but you know what I'm saying. We also ask for the removal of rigid and time-consuming requirements around testing, student discipline, and staff evaluations in order to allow educators time to focus on student academic goals and the development of becoming life-ready citizens. I'm going to now turn it over to Mr. Wayne Workman, who's going to share our next priority. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and honorable committee members. Thank you for the opportunity to present our NAS Invest document. I'll be speaking about connecting. My name is Wayne Workman, and I have the privilege of serving as the superintendent for the Lyon County School District. Although my comments will be brief, I respectfully ask that you not mistake my brevity for a lack of importance. If we have learned anything from the COVID-19 global pandemic, it is the importance of connecting. A basic human need that has always existed has been the need to connect with other human beings, including family, friends, teachers, students, coworkers, healthcare providers, and the list goes on, depending on individual circumstances. Our overall health is greatly affected by this need, and the aforementioned global pandemic has only exacerbated this issue. Interestingly, in today's world, the basic human need now includes the need to connect through electronic means, such as we are doing now. And this, of course, requires devices and high-speed internet. The pandemic has greatly exposed the lack of access to these services in our Nevada communities, but even more so in our rural and frontier areas. We have a long way to go before we can say that all Nevada citizens have equal access to this basic human need. School district budgets are not currently designed to include funding for devices and high-speed internet at home. Although these devices and internet connectivity are absolutely critical for students and staff so that the curricula and learning materials can be accessed, it is certainly not an exclusive issue to education. More than ever before, government services are offered electronically and require devices and high-speed internet to access them. Because of this, it can be easily argued that high-speed internet connectivity and access to devices should be treated like other fundamental utilities, such as water and electricity. Further, it can be argued that high-speed internet connectivity and access to devices are a fundamental need in providing a free and appropriate public education to our deserving students. This is a community and state issue that needs to be solved holistically so that all Nevada citizens, especially our youth, can meet the basic human need of connecting. NAS and school district leaders are ready to assist our wonderful state leaders in solving this community and state issue. Thank you.
Madam Chair, esteemed members of the Assembly Education Committee, for the record, my name is Dr. David Jensen, Superintendent for Humboldt County School District, and it is my privilege to share with you our priorities around funding. From the inception of the initial INVEST document, which was presented to the legislature in 2003, Nevada's superintendents have rallied around the cause of transitioning Nevada towards optimal educational funding. In concert with the Finance Commission, of which I have the honor of serving, NAS supports the efforts of the Commission in meeting the charges of SB 543, which was introduced in the 2019 legislative session to develop a plan to meet this optimal funding target. In an effort to further this effort, NAS is requesting your support in addressing the funding needs of Nevada students as outlined in the following three critical funding needs. Number one, fund the base at optimal levels for all students while providing additional financial supports for Nevada's most at-risk children. We, along with the Commission, recognize that Nevada cannot reach optimal funding overnight. As you will hear from both the Nevada Association of School Superintendents and the Commission, we encourage the legislature to address this need through a three-pronged approach. And as I indicated, you will hear this again from the Education Funding Commission. Number one is to restore. If you looked at fiscal year 20 and fiscal year 21, 1.8 billion per year or 3.6 billion over the biennium was dedicated to public education. The proposed budgets for FY 22 and 23 reduced that down to 3.3 billion. This reduction is greater than $3 million when considered with Assembly Bill 3 inflation, enrollment growth, and associated Nevada Department of Education reductions. This would be a one-time cost to restore, and we would recommend that the legislature enact this restoration as part of the July 2021 biennium. The second step then becomes the question of adequate funding. The definition of adequate is that there would be funds sufficient for all students to meet state standards and statutory requirements. The APA study conducted in FY19, along with fully funded targets weights, special ed percent increase, NDE at adequate level, plus inflation, plus enrollment growth, would require approximately 1 billion additional funds annually. That would provide approximately 2,000 more per each child per year. This is an annual amount. We recognize again that that cannot happen overnight, and we would recommend to the legislature that we develop a plan to reach that over the next several bienniums. That then brings me to that final target for all of us, and that's optimal funding for all of Nevada's students. Optimal is defined as sufficient for strategic investment in practices and resources aligned with Nevada's 5-year strategic plan that supports all students to exemplary student achievement on par with the nation's best. The Commission is currently working on evaluating the fiscal needs to support this target. This too would require ongoing support, and we believe that this can be accomplished over the next 5 bienniums and beyond. The second component is to increase state spending on public education by creating broad-based new revenue streams to support optimal funding for all students. We are clearly aware that in order to meet adequate and optimal funding levels, additional revenues will be necessary. NAS supports the work of the Finance Commission in working on additional funding streams in order to meet the expectations of Senate Bill 543. As you will hear over time, the Commission will recommend an examination of opportunities within existing taxes through tax reform or restructuring of current tax practices. Key considerations that the Commission is looking at include the following. Is there sufficiency? Can it be stable and predictable? Is there competitiveness? And is there equity? And two examples of some areas that we are investigating at this time include modifications to property tax and modifications to the sales and use tax. Finally, the third area is to protect school districts who have lost enrollment due to the COVID-19 pandemic by holding them harmless in FY21 to enable districts to continue vital programs for students. In response to COVID-19, parents from across the state have opted to homeschool students or seek alternative educational methods in order to protect their children. Currently, 15 of the 17 school districts have seen a reduction in enrollment during fiscal year 21. Of those 15, 7 report overall reductions of enrollment greater than 5%. This has some unintended consequences in terms of staffing for the upcoming year at a time when we hope and anticipate that the majority of these students will return to the classrooms. Given current circumstances, the ability to make projections regarding enrollment for FY22 and FY23 are extremely difficult until restrictions are lifted, allowing for a full return to school. In order to ensure schools and districts are prepared to meet a potential influx of students when the pandemic comes to hopefully a short end, maintaining a hold harmless will be essential to meet the needs of Nevada's children. Madam Chair and members of the Assembly, that concludes our presentation on behalf of the Nevada Association of School Superintendents on INVEST. And at this time, we would open it up to any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from our members? Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I try and get it into the chat first, but wasn't typing fast enough. So is it okay if I just do that, raise a finger?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. And thank you for that presentation, and thank you for all your hard work particularly over what's been an unprecedentedly demanding time period for our educators, for our administrators, for our students, for our families. And I just want to stop first and just acknowledge and thank you for being as dedicated as ever, even in the midst of all these challenges. And thank you for not just addressing the immediate needs, but also just continuing to come back to the long-term needs of education in our state and not losing focus on that. And one in particular that stood out to me was streamlining, because that's certainly something that we've been having conversations about for some time, and in particular elimination. And I congratulate you on these bold goals. I think it's good to have continue to hold the high standard of bold goals. Otherwise, we won't make any progress towards any of them. But particularly your recommendation to elimination of and prohibition of any and all unfunded mandates. And, we have a bookshelf behind us of all the NRS, and we could all spend hours and hours into the middle of the night going through those. But I wonder if you, over this period of time working together, have you ever come up with a list of what all those unfunded mandates are in one singular document that you could perhaps provide to this committee to be a way of helping direct those conversations?
Thank you. This is Summer Stevens for the record. Thank you, Assemblywoman Torres, for that. And I've only been in this state for a couple of years, so my colleagues may have some additional items to share. So I would turn it over to them first, because I'm not aware that we have compiled a list, but that's very possible that it does exist. So Superintendent Jensen or Workman, either of you know of a list that exists or any examples you could share?
Madam Chair, this is Dr. Jensen for the record, and then I'll ask Superintendent Workman to join in. The NAS group actually did engage in this work, if not the last biennium, the biennium prior to that. So we certainly can go back and resurrect that from our prior efforts and present that to the Assembly so that you can give that consideration. But yes, we have started that work.
Thank you. And if you could get that to my office or our committee manager, and then we can get that out to folks. So I think that would be helpful. I'm under from what I've heard, it's a pretty large amount. So if we could get that and at least be able to move on and help you all from there. Mr. Workman, did you have anything else to add?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Wayne Workman for the record. I do not. We did compile a list, and we are happy to get that to all of you as soon as we are able, so that you can have a real keen eye on exactly what we're talking about in the INVEST document. So thank you.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Torres, did you have a question?
I guess and this is at the discretion of the chair. I'm not sure if this was supposed to just be an open presentation about the Nevada Association of School Superintendents, or if this is a good opportunity to ask questions that maybe you don't have to do necessarily with COVID-19.
Yes, no, our next presentation will be specifically on the pandemic, but no, this is an open presentation for the superintendents.
Perfect. So then I think this is a perfect time for me to ask these questions. And so in your presentations, I really do appreciate all the work that school superintendents have done to ensure that our students are getting quality education during this time. And I understand that it's been challenging. It's taken a lot of flexibility for schools, for teachers, for families. So I really do appreciate the work that you all have done. And so I just wanted to know if we have any information about how this has impacted specific groups, specifically looking at like Title I students, students of color, and our English language learners and students with disabilities.
Madam Chair, if I may, this is Wayne Workman for the record. Yes, we do have information from each of our individual districts. We have recently completed, as you know, the first semester of the school year, and many of our districts have been able to do some of the testing required, like MAPS testing, for example. And from that, we do have information. Generally speaking, I know that for the Lyon County School District, I can speak to the fact that we have a higher failure rate now than we have had before. We are still going to present this information to our school board, but at the risk of getting out ahead of them, we know that our students who are being instructed at a distance have a higher trend of failure rate than those that we have in person, full-time, and in person in our hybrid model in the Lyon County School District. And so that's just one example of how we know that this is impacting student learning. And it really is just shining a light on the importance of those in-person connections with our teachers and our school staff that our students absolutely crave and that they need in order to be successful. Our staff are able to perform miracles on a daily basis, but doing it at a distance has certainly put them at a disadvantage because of the inability to maintain those relationships in many circumstances. So again, thank you for that opportunity, and thank you to all of our amazing staff members who make those connections and make the miracle of learning take place in our great state of Nevada. Thank you.
Thank you, and I do appreciate that. A follow-up, if I may, Chair?
Absolutely.
Thank you. And, you know, we didn't talk a lot about like the success for students with disabilities or English language learners during this presentation. And I'm particularly interested in our English language learners. As last session, we passed AB 219, which required that school districts do some work around our English language learners. So I'm wondering if you have any information or follow-up information. You might not have that available right now, but if you could just give us some information about the success of that legislation and what that looks like and how school districts have implemented that and schools have implemented that.
This is Superintendent Stevens from Churchill. I'll just share about our perspective, and then certainly any others can share, because as we talked about, you know, we're very unique, 17 different districts that have different makeups of students and families. So here in Churchill, we have various bright spots related to our English language learner learners and their success. We have a lot of success with our students as they go into 4th and 5th grade. And so we're working hard on trying to replicate what those successes look like as they move into our middle level and our high school level. We've had a disproportionate number of students in middle level that have been doubly identified as an English language learner and a student with a disability. And so we want to make sure that in fact, that it is a disability and that we haven't created circumstances that have created those gaps. So we're working really hard on that and working with the regional professional development resources and having folks in. They're actually doing co-teaching models this year with our classroom teachers and our support staff that work closely with our English language learners. So that's been really successful. It's an area we continue to still work in. And I would share, just as a follow-up to Superintendent Workman, I think we all have a lot of challenges and we've all approached the reopening very differently. We have had very, very positive success in our reopening. And one of those elements is that we do have our students, although not fully back in our district of about 3,200 students, our students who come in person do come every day. And we actually have had a significant reduction in failures at our middle school level, and across our district, we have had a significant reduction in behaviors and an increase in attendance, which we found very interesting. One group that we're very concerned about as we do look at our full-time online students is our students that are new to learning English and our families that are English as a second language families. Many of our families chose distance learning. And so trying to make sure that we get all of the resources and supports out to them, all of the information out to them in methods that we know that they will understand the material, and then our staff helping to support that. So definitely some work to do. Our full-time online kids, we went from having 60 middle and high school students as full-time online students previously to almost 900 K-12. So that was a big shift for us as well. But I wanted to share that today. So letting the other districts share now. Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent. Assemblywoman Torres, did that answer your questions or did you want anything else?
Thank you, Chair. And, if school districts could just send me some basic information about the implementation of the corrective action plans that were implemented by AB 219. It did require for underperforming school districts to create corrective action plans, and that was from the 2019 legislative session. And so I just wanted some information about what that looks like. And obviously, I know that schools and school districts have been significantly impacted by the changing nature of education over the last couple months. But I would just love an update on that, as many of us will be looking at legislation later on this session that deals with English language learners.
And thank you for that. And actually, if you guys can get that to our committee staff, and we will once again get that out to our folks. So I think Ms. Robusto will be reaching out to you to facilitate that. We do have a couple more questions. First, we'll start with Assemblywoman Nguyen.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Nguyen, Assembly District 10. Thank you. I remember from the 2019 session, there was Assembly Bill 168 that had to do with restorative justice. And I was wondering how that implementation was going across the state. And I was wondering if you had any kind of information to provide about the training that the schools and teachers are receiving in light of that Assembly Bill from 2019.
Thank you, Madam Chair. If I may, again, Wayne Workman, Lyon County School District. In regards to that particular bill on restorative justice, I will say that there has been a great deal of training across districts, just in my conversations with other superintendents, specifically to the Lyon County School District. We've had a number of trainings that have been implemented, and certainly our administrators and even our teachers have gone a long way in implementing the strategies and the practices associated with restorative justice and restorative practices. There may be what I'll call a false sense of success in the data simply because of COVID-19. Last spring, obviously, we didn't have students in person, so that dramatically reduced any discipline or need for restorative practices. However, I will say, moving forward into this school year, as the Lyon County School District in particular has been able to invite students back, we have still maintained a significant decrease in behaviors and also in the need for discipline and also those restorative practices. It's also allowed for the opportunity to implement many social emotional learning initiatives or, for example, PBIS, positive behavior intervention supports, into our schools. And all those things collectively, I believe, are having a huge impact on the reduction of any types of suspensions and expulsions and such. So coming a long way with that, although the bill itself, I know that there's some information coming forward on possibly cleaning up some of the language to make it easier to implement and also more applicable to the school settings and some of the requirements there. So we respectfully request that you give serious consideration to those that will be coming forward soon. Thank you.
And did that answer your question, Assemblywoman Nguyen?
I do have just a follow-up, if that's okay, Chair.
I figured you might.
I don't know if you can speak to the other districts, but is there, do you have information about the training that you've implemented within your district? Is it consistent amongst the state in your conversations, or are you using a similar type of, I guess, training for teachers and staff?
Again, I can only speak to the Lyon County School District, and I don't know that it is consistent across the state. We actually reached out to the Western Educational Equity Assistance Center. They're out of Denver, Colorado, and they are a free service that mostly deals with compliance-related issues in regards to civil rights. And they've been absolutely wonderful. They've provided us not only restorative practices training, but also trauma-informed care training. All of our administrators and counselors have been through that training with then supplemental training to our teachers in the Lyon County School District. So I'm not aware if any other or all other school districts are doing that, but I know that some of them already had some different in-house trainings going on. If I may speak for Clark and Washoe, I believe that was the case there.
Chairwoman, if it's possible for the other people on the call, if they do have any kind of written documentation about those policies and their training, if they could provide it to the committee, I know that would be appreciative of me, especially since we're going to be potentially looking at legislation following up or cleaning up, as Mr. Workman had said.
Absolutely. So we have yet another thing that we're going to follow up. Ms. Robusto, if you could do that with all the different superintendents, I think the committee would appreciate that. Next, we will go to Assemblywoman Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you all for being here. I wanted to take a moment. I have a question or two, but I wanted to take a moment to also offer our gratitude and thanks for how you've navigated this difficult time, as if it wasn't already hard to be a superintendent of a school district and then put on a pandemic. So it's not lost on us how hard your jobs are. And several of you I've worked with, my district covers seven counties, 7 school districts. And so I've been amazed, and a lot of you in the rural districts having to have an added pressure between distance learning with connectivity issues. And so again, want you to know how grateful we are for how you've tried your best to serve the children of our state. Couple of questions. When I'm just curious, and this might catch off guard a little bit. Can you give us an idea? Oh, and the surveys were very helpful. Appreciate the responses, able to go through all the counties. in particular go over the 7 counties that I represent. But when there was, the initial going distance learning and the districts that did that, can you estimate about how long it took you to get get your Chromebooks, have proper connectivity? Was there a lag of 2 months, 3 months? I'm just curious.
Madam Chair, if I
Go
may,
ahead. Go ahead, Dave.
This is Dr. Jensen for the record. Thank you, Assemblywoman Hanson. I think you're also going to find that that's going to vary by district to district. When we consider Humboldt County School District, 11 schools over 9,600 square miles. One of them includes Denio Elementary School, which is 100 miles away from my office with a sum total of 8 students. Those students live on ranching locations, many of which not only have no connectivity, but even lack cell signal. So we're currently working and have been working with PBS to see if we can't use radio and TV antennas to broadcast into those homes. Beyond that, for Humboldt County, we had already been in a position in which we had sufficient Chromebooks to issue to every student that needed it, starting upon closure in March of last year. The Chromebooks at that time, as we had them, were not intended to go home on a daily basis. So now we're in a rotation to try to replace those that become damaged or inoperable. And we are all running against challenges to have new Chromebooks arrive due to the national, and I'd almost say international press for new Chromebooks. Beyond that connectivity, we have connectivity now for virtually every one of our students. If they choose to engage in distance learning, we are able to support that through either hotspot or some other. We've created a web type of a mechanism off of our facilities that's still in progress right now that will provide Wi-Fi connectivity that's filtered and SIPA compliant. So, and I can echo that. I know every district in the state has done absolutely everything they can, but there still are some challenges. I think of our friends in Eureka County. Eureka County, just by the nature of it, struggles with connectivity, even pre-COVID periods.
Did that answer your question, Assemblywoman?
It did. I didn't know if anybody else wanted to respond. And thank you for highlighting that. Yet it amazes me that necessity is the mother of invention and how you all have scrambled to try to find solutions. And so greatly appreciated. And then the second question, if I may, Chair, is
Sure.
With transportation issues in the rural districts is always a challenge. And I'm just curious, and this is directed to any of you, the added measures of having to have social distancing on the buses. I'm not sure how crowded your buses were before, but has that complicated it for you?
I'll go ahead and jump in real quick, and then I'll turn it over to my colleagues. In Humboldt County, it is the reason why in Winnemucca we're on a hybrid model, because I cannot transport my kids to school. If it was for the absence of restrictions on transportation, we would be fully opened. In my remote rural sites, my 4 remote rurals in McDermott, we are fully open because we can maintain the social distancing requirement on the buses in those locations. So that's probably the biggest barrier for us right now, is relaxing the restrictions on transportation.
And I did just want to remind folks that the districts will be presenting on their COVID responses and some of these issues on our next presentation. So a lot of them were overlap, but if I don't want to get too far on the weeds when we have the next presentation coming up. I believe Assemblywoman Gorlow, you had a question?
I did, thank you, Chair. And this might actually be covered in the next presentation with the COVID, but I'm concerned with the high number of failure rates that we've had in many of the districts, and wanted to know what kind of plans were in place to help these kids catch up. Is it going to be a summer school? Or are they going to be dual classes next semester? Again, that might be covered in the COVID response as well. So thank you.
Yeah, I think that would probably be better addressed in our next presentation. If that's okay, Assemblywoman. Okay. I have the gallery view open so I can see all my members. If anybody has a question, can you just raise your hand? Okay, no scratching of the face, Superintendent Jensen. Okay, then I believe we are going to move on to our next presentation, and thank you so much to our presenters. I really appreciate it. So next we will move on to our second presentation, where we will hear from school district representatives and the State Public Charter School Authority on their COVID-19 responses and school reopening plans. We'll go through the presentation first, obviously, and then do questions after. We have Superintendent Jara from the Clark County School District to start off. After Superintendent Jara, we have Superintendent Mcneill from Washoe County School District, Superintendent Fetch from Pershing County, and Rebecca Fiden from the State Public Charter School Authority. Go ahead, Superintendent Jara.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, committee members, for allowing me to be here this afternoon. Am I presenting, or is somebody presenting, or do you have the presentation? Perfect.
Yes, Mr. Keating is sharing his screen.
Thank you, Dr. Keating. So in the next few minutes, I will be providing an update on the work on the assembly, on really what we've done in reopening our schools August 24th, that we've been into distance education. I first of all like to thank you for allowing me to be here, and really I want to kind of preface in the conversation here that the 42,000 employees in the school districts have done an amazing job of really turning the fifth largest district and fourth largest rural district in the state of Nevada upside down to distance education. What you will see, the next slide, Brad, for me. What you'll see, we opened school in what I would say in all three models that we turned into the state. The State Department of Education in the fall. We opened with some schools. We had 7 schools that were in some kind of face-to-face instruction. We had some of our rural community schools, one elementary that was on a 5-day, because they were able to open up on a 5-day face-to-face, following our guidelines, following the CDC guidelines, and then the Nevada's path forward. We do have a few other schools that are on a hybrid as well, but the majority of our schools are on distance education, and that's due to following our guidelines that we have continued to report here locally, working with the Southern Nevada Health District and our county partners. We then presented to the School Board of Trustees in January 14th. We presented our plan to move into a what I would say a face-to-face in a pre-K model. The reason that we did that, we couldn't continue to see just the academic, and I'm going to share a little bit of some of the things that we have seen as a district. Our COVID case numbers in this county, as you all have seen, continue to remain high, but we needed to look at more than just the COVID cases. We had to look at the mental health crisis that we are dealing with here in Clark County. We also had to deal with our academic loss and academic crisis. So we moved into, in partnership with our teachers union, our exclusive bargaining partner, CCEA, and signed an MOU that the School Board of Trustees approved to move into a hybrid pre-K through 3 grade, and starting to look and see how we can get into some type of face-to-face instruction. So very proud of the work that we have done as an urban district in bringing our educators in. We also have what we look at, and some of the questions that were asked a little while ago around our volunteer, what are we doing to mitigate some of the academic loss, some of the failure rate? We are also, the Board of Trustees at January 14th also approved unanimously for schools to start bringing small group into our schools, into our campuses, voluntary. So if students can come in, looking at what the teachers also bringing in our students for not only academics, for social, emotional, and for support of our schools. That is a 4 through 12 approach, looking at our high school seniors graduation, and also some of the transitions. That would be something that it's not autonomous where every school will have their own opportunity to do that. Is really for us to put some frameworks in place to bring in our schools, our students into our classroom. So Brad, if you can go to the next slide. What we have seen, not like some of the very similar as my colleagues, we have seen in our first semester analysis an increase in D and F grades. I want to be very clear. This is not due to our teachers not working hard, our students just not doing what they need to do. This is just what we are dealing with in distance education, the challenges that we are facing. So the immediate academic support has been provided. We're also looking at how we can provide some long-term systems and structures to provide our learning opportunity. As has been noted, we also started a multi-leadership team in our schools. Every school has one to really address the needs not only of our students, but also of our staff, a social emotional screener partnership with NDE, our state superintendent, and my colleagues across the state, looking at a universal screener for us to be able to identify some of the needs of our students and staff. And certainly, as I said to the board and continue to say to this community, distance education has been difficult, has been a challenge. So we continue to provide training for teachers and for administrators to make sure that we improve the instruction opportunity for our students. Because as you heard from my colleagues that just presented, this is something that we as a state and as a school system need to continue to invest moving forward. As we've put all these devices in our kids' hands and our teachers, this is the way that we're going to come back. When we come back to school, whatever that looks like in August, we have to make sure that we continue the investment that we're doing here in this past year. So if you can go to the next slide, Brad. So small group academic instruction, again, as our team put the plan together, has already sent it to our principals. Our principals are working diligently. It will be revised and reviewed. Social emotional well-being support, academic interventions, academic screening, transportation may be available depending on the school, depending on the ability. That is a huge equity concern for me as a superintendent, but we need to find a way. And as Dr. Jensen, my colleague, one of the challenges that we're facing with transportation is going to be moving from 73 passenger bus, practicing social distancing. We can't put more than 28 kids in our buses. So that is a concern that we have, but we need to find a way to accommodate their needs for our children who need to be in front of our very caring and dedicated adults. If you can go to the next slide. So here's what our model, our hybrid model looks like. So cohort A, and again, this is also by choice. Parents will get to select. It's not a mandate. So parents, I spoke to an elementary school principal this week that some of the parents in their survey submitted that only 180 kids are going to come to school and have completed the survey. I also spoke to another elementary school principal that has 475. So it's going to be depending on the choice of the parents. So parents will select on cohort A, which would be Monday, Tuesday. That means Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, they will be in distance education. Cohort B will be the opposite. Our Wednesday is for enhanced cleaning. Following the CDC guidelines, we have to make sure that we maintain our cohorts in different, without, I would say, commingling, if you will. So the Wednesday is for students to all be doing asynchronous distance education, and our educators will be on campus and will be doing professional learning. Again, this starts for pre-K3, will start March 1st. If you can go to the next slide. And I would like to say, and really the governor's office has been instrumental the last couple of weeks. Now that we have a deadline, we're working on completing our mitigation strategies for our vaccination. We're working on our testing, our contact tracing to make sure that we have what we need for March 1st. So in collaboration with the governor's office, with the state superintendent, the Southern Nevada Health District, I can tell you that we will be ready for the March 1st. Also, ongoing conversations right now with our CCEA, with CASAPI, which is the administrators union, to make sure that we're successful in our implementation. So then we can start finding ways to bring our children in the upper grades back into our schools. We're the only district that is fully distance education at this time in the state of Nevada. And our kids need to be in front of our very caring individual, teachers and support staff, to make sure that we address not only the academic loss, we address the social, emotional challenges and crises that our kids are facing at this time. Thank you, Madam Chair, and stand ready to answer any questions.
I apologize, I was muted. We're actually going to go through the other presentation, so if you'll stand by, if that is okay. So we'll go ahead with Superintendent Mcneill.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Dr. Kristen Mcneill with the Washoe County School District, and I believe our Government Affairs Director, Ms. Lindsay Anderson, is going to be sharing her screen as we get started here. Thank you so much, Lindsay. So once again, just thank you to my fellow colleagues as a new superintendent for the Washoe County School District, but obviously not new to education. This will be around close to my third decade in education, and I will tell you without a doubt, Dr. Jar and I are on Council of Great City Schools calls. We were on there this morning. Without a doubt, this is one of the heaviest lifts we have ever done as superintendents, but all for the unique needs of our students and our staff members. Our guiding principles in the Washoe County School District from day one, when we went into closure last year in March, right away we started to put together our principles around what is going to be driving us and all decisions made in order to make sure that our students and our staff have what they need. So all of our decisions are based around a do no harm. And examples that I use are around attendance and grading. And, we could not be where we are today in the Washoe County School District without all of the help and support of our 8,000 dedicated professionals, from our teachers to our principals, our support staff. Every single day, these people, they show up and they do what they need to do, all for our children, our 62,000 students, ensuring our students and our families and our staff basic needs are met around food stability, housing stability, and mental health needs, ensuring equitable access for all students. I'll have a slide in later in the presentation around devices and hotspots, maintaining high academic expectations for all students. And that means meeting essential standards and work around professional learning communities. I'll touch a little bit. I know that there was a question on course failure rates. And then obviously following all of our federal, state, and local health related mandates and guidelines. Lindsay, if you'd advance the slide, please. Thank you. So our current models in the Washoe County School District, since August of this year, we have been in person 5 days a week for our elementary. All of our elementary schools every day have in-person instruction. Our middle and our high schools, similar to the proposal for Clark County School District, we have a hybrid schedule every other day. And this has been not a very easy schedule. There are concerns, there are issues with hybrid, but our teachers and our principals, they are making it work. For a period of time, we did go full distance until we could get some additional resources. But now all of our middle and high schools are back into the hybrid model. Our families also have the option in Washoe County School District to have a full distance learning. So every single one of our schools, our 104 campuses, have the ability to have full distance learning, as well as either in-person or hybrid, depending on the level of elementary, middle, or high school. We do also have for our English language learners, special education, gifted and talented, and our foster children and children in transition, they are also have the option to have 5 days a week. So currently we have about 24,000 students in person 5 days a week, about 17,980 on full distance learning, and then another 19,270 students on our hybrid model. Our plans are put together on a multi-layered safety and health. When we talk about mitigation efforts, our schools are safe. There is not community spread that you would see outwards in the community in our schools. We have self-screening every day before our students and our staff leave home. Continuous processes around cleaning within our schools, ventilation, heating and ventilation, our HVAC systems, social distancing in our elementaries, that is at 3 feet. In our middle and our high schools, that is still at 6 feet. Mandatory face coverings, and I am so proud of all of our students. I was visiting 2 elementary schools today. Even our little ones, our 3 and 4 year olds, full face coverings, and they are our teachers are just heroes when we are walking through classrooms and what our students are able to do. And then obviously continue hygiene efforts around cleaning hands. Nutrition services, obviously food security around our school district is a top priority. All of our meals, as in all of our districts, are free of charge through the summer. Thank you to the Nevada Department of Agriculture and the National Front for getting food into our little students. And then we have served over 35,000 meals a day, and that is in person and hybrid. And we also have meals distributed for our full distance learning. And just this past week, we had 2 days where we had to close because of snow. And then on Friday, our nutrition services department served over 12,000 meals in 864 meal kits. But obviously nutrition services is a huge priority within our school district. Over 2.9 million meals served year to date within our school district for all of our families. So just a huge effort on our nutrition services staff for what they've had to do in order to make sure that our families have food. And then for our digital and devices, over 17,276 devices have been provided to our families. And that is since August. We've purchased 3,000 hotspots. We've received an additional 3,000 hotspots from the T-Mobile settlement. And then so far to date, we have about 3,500 of our hotspots distributed throughout our school district. And that includes remote areas such as Gerlach and Natchez as well. We continue to distribute those hotspots. I can't say enough about our partners in education, our close relationship with the Education Alliance. They have provided thousands of devices throughout our community and our district. The city of Reno provided additional CARES funding for devices. Our Lions Club has really helped out in this effort, and then just private citizens coming to the aid of our schools. I was out at a school this morning, and they were distributing laptops that a faith-based community group provided for our families, so that each one of those students can have a device. And then going forward, we are extremely fortunate here in Washoe County. Almost all of our staff members have now been offered an appointment for a vaccine. Starting about 2 months ago, we put some plans into action. Our fire departments have stepped up. Our Washoe County has been a tremendous partner in this, and obviously the health district. Over the last 3 weeks, almost all of our employees will have received their first shot. By February 13th, almost all 8,000 of our employees will have received their first dose. By mid-March, depending on supplies, we are hopeful that all of our employees will have received their second shot, depending on supplies. We have regular and ongoing monitoring of our COVID data. We have a COVID dashboard on our website. that is continually updated. Our testing, contact tracing efforts, that has been such a huge lift. Contact tracing is probably one of the most complex processes. We have, our principals have just done a tremendous effort. We've got support staff and central services staff. We talk about all hands on deck. We've got a strike force in place right now where central services, these employees have regular day jobs. However, they drop everything when we have a COVID case reported in one of our schools, and they work very closely with our principals. Guest teachers, thanks to the work of State Superintendent Ebert and the Nevada Department of Education, we have been able to offer an emergency waiver. Over 200 have taken advantage of that for guest teachers, which helps out when we have to exclude one of our own teachers. And then obviously our Federal CARES Act funding going into the school year of 21-22 will be used for academic recovery, mental health needs, and then other areas such as summer school, bridge, extended learning opportunities. This past Friday, we had a work session with our Board of Trustees around instituting a 2-year strategic plan that is going to be exclusively built around academic recovery and mental health support, with laser focus on having our students have everything that they need in order to gain academic momentum over the next 2 years as we come out of the pandemic. And with that, able to answer any questions after the last presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to Superintendent Betch.
Yes, good afternoon. Thank you, Chair Bilbray Axelrod and other members of the committee, to my counterparts who've presented. Thank you for laying such the foundation for me to try and tackle probably the most diverse section in the other 15 counties. Our challenges are very similar. I think the thing that we understand with COVID-19 is it impacts us all in the same ways. It's about what our resources and our abilities to play by the rule book that's been given to us. We have some advantages and we have some disadvantages when it comes to our sizes. I focus on the fact that in the rurals, we have districts that have had to be remote. You heard from Dr. Jensen earlier, depending on location, busing, those things, it's very similar to what you've heard across the board, all the way to districts such as myself in Pershing County, Eureka, Lincoln, that have been able to have in-person instruction since day one. And that's given the size of our enrollments and facilities, those types of things. So we have far-ranging districts, different modes of delivery. We have all 3 different modes, from a hybrid, full distance learning, as well as in-person learning taking place in all different levels. Those modes of delivery are revisited, if not daily, all the time, depending on what your caseloads are with COVID in your community, within your school setting, etc. All of the things that Dr. Mcneill just mentioned on the multi-layered safety and health, we all do every single day in order to get our kids in session. Aging facilities has caused some of our small districts issues. When you think of the fact that many of our rural communities haven't been built a new school in quite some time, they're designed from 30 or 40 years ago when spaces weren't near as large as some of our new schools have been. And that has impacted some of their abilities to get their schools open. When you take a high school such as Elko High School, their classrooms are a lot smaller than ones that may be built today. And that's limited their ability to put more kids in. I'm trying to go through your check sheet that you had of different things here. And one part that really has been brought up by a number of our districts, and it's not just out in the rurals. I know my counterparts in the large cities have experienced it, but our drop in enrollment because of homeschooling. You know, there's many of us that have 5, 6, 7% that we've lost to homeschool. We're never going to be able to make our facility safe enough for some, and we're never going to be able to meet the mandates of the anti-mask population in other communities. Talk about Pershing in particular. We had around 63 individuals file for homeschooling, even though they had an option for distance learning. Various reasons for that, mainly around the fact that no matter if you're on a distance learning program or not, you have school district rules and regulations, attendance requirements, those things that you have, or homeschooling, you don't quite have those requirements. Some of my other counterparts have experienced the same type of thing. And what it's done is it's created us, by no fault of our own, but by our response to COVID, it's required us to lose 5 to 7% of our population. And we don't know what that's going to mean long term. We know what it means short term with financing. It means we've lost 5 to 7% of our DSA funding that's been coming in, and all unexpectedly. And so I didn't hear anybody point out the homeschool and the drop in enrollment section. That's a true ongoing concern that we have. We've mentioned about challenges with distance learning, access to devices, connectivity. All those things take place in every one of our small rural communities and our remote areas of the state. We've deployed mobile hotspots where we can. We've upgraded wireless Wi-Fi units within communities. As Dr. Jensen mentioned, they're trying to explore different options with PBS. They've tried to put things that connect to their district. All of those things are happening across the board. None of us are immune to those things. None of us are immune to the fact that we can place an order for Chromebooks in September and not receive them until earlier to the end of December. We ordered 150 of them for our first through third grades, and that's a specific example. And every one of our districts can give you the same thing. Really crunched on where we're at. Transportation. You heard from Dr. Jensen already when he answered the question around transportation, and it being probably the biggest hurdle that they have to face to get to in-person learning within his community. He's not alone in that. If you were to poll our group of 17, I think transportation is going to be a resounding issue and has been, and one thing we've pushed to get some relaxation on. We've been transporting kids since day one. We've had in-person instruction. We haven't, knock on wood, experienced community spread of COVID-19 within our school system. We haven't experienced it on school buses. Mitigation efforts work, but we need to find a way that we can offer our kids that need transportation to school. And none of us have enough buses or drivers to get them there underneath the current restrictions. Just doesn't exist. I know you'll be free to ask any questions of us as you go forward. So let me just make sure I've touched on your 8 or 9 questions here. Yeah, I just wrap up and say that we're no different than the challenges across all of us, the 17 public school districts and Rebecca's Charter Schools Association. We've all fought the same things, and we're lucky to have a group that can work together and share information and be a team as we try to tackle these challenges we face. And I appreciate your time.
Thank you very much, Superintendent. I was actually thinking that we would do some questions. Are you okay with that, Ms. Hyden? If we have questions and then do your presentation, are you okay with that?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. So I have a few questions, and I have a question myself, but I'm going to turn it over to. This is who I have. I have Assemblywoman Miller, Assemblywoman Torres, Assemblywoman Wynn, Assemblywoman Margolis. Is there any other? You can raise your hand. I've got Assemblywoman Hardy. Oh, I forgot you, Assemblywoman Gorlow. I think you were right after Selena Torres. So, shoot, and Hardy. Anyone else? Okay, so let's start with Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Chair. My first question is actually, I'll address it to the schools that have had students within the building. How has it been with maintaining the requirement to for students to wear masks? Because I know that's one challenge or concern that I hear from many educators about returning to the schools is how do we maintain the requirement for students to wear their mask the entire time, and that, you know, educators and admin in the building have that authority to enforce it. So if anyone wanted to jump in and speak on that.
I'd be happy to take that. I don't know if you. Okay, so Assemblywoman Miller, your question, I know Dr. Mcneill mentioned this already at her point saying about touring schools, but it was one of our things that when we talked about our reopening plan, and we've been open since day one, and I'm so thankful for it when I listen to the challenges my counterparts have had. One of the biggest concerns and pushbacks we've had going into it was your kids will never wear the mask. They'll never do it. And we're all going to be in the classroom. We're going to be the mask police. And all we're going to do is spend hours on day telling them, pull your mask up, Johnny, put your mask up. The reality is our kids hit the ground running day one. The naysayers of the parents that were the biggest naysayers in our board meeting that dropped their kid off, and I stood out there on day one at the elementary school and watched the little kindergartners and preschoolers run in the gate to head to meet their teacher and be spread out. It was a non-issue, and it's continued to be a non-issue. We have our few outliers of a middle school kid or a high school kid that brings some, you know, I hate to say it, but a political stance or agenda, and they're going to make this thing about, I'm not going to wear my mask and it's my constitutional right. You know, you have those pieces that come, and you remind them that they have other options for their education, and it goes away. It's really, our kids are thankful for that opportunity. It's a it never materialized as an issue.
And if
could I just jump in really quickly? And I should have said this before. If you are speaking, will you please identify yourself? Our committee secretaries do their best to take these notes, but that would be very helpful.
Will do.
For the record, Kristen Mcneill, Superintendent of Washoe County, and that's exactly right. And thank you so much for that question, Assemblywoman Miller. You know, I have a bag here of all of our face coverings for our high schools, right? You know, and every time we go into a school, we obviously wear our face coverings, but I will tell you, our students have really stepped up, and they understand the seriousness of this. They understand the seriousness of this, not only for themselves, but for their families. And our teachers have just been amazing. Our principals, our support staff, our bus drivers, because they're the first ones that see our students. And, you know, I know there was a lot of fear when we opened up schools as we were coming into July and August. But, you know, I can remember driving back from Hug High School, the very first day of school, and our students were wearing their face coverings even off campus. They are taking it very, very seriously.
Okay, we will move on to Assemblywoman Torres.
Sorry, I have too many screens, so I'm trying to find a button, figure out which screen I'm supposed to be looking at what time. Thank you so much for your presentation. I really do appreciate it, and all the work that the superintendents have done to make sure that our students are able to continue receiving a quality education during this time. My question is focused specifically for Washoe County School District. And I don't know that it applies necessarily to the other school districts, but I recently had a conversation with some educators and counselors up in Washoe County, and they expressed that currently there has been they were encouraged throughout the fall semester to get seniors to graduate, essentially finish their credits, but they weren't graduating early. They'd be continuing to graduate and walk in the summer when their peers walk. And I'm just wondering what support has been provided to those students to ensure that they have the tools that they need to go back to college. We know that oftentimes when students are encouraged to graduate early, especially since they wouldn't have been able to enroll in a community college right off the bat, like what supports have been available to those students so that they can go to higher education?
No, I appreciate that question. Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Torres. So within Washoe County School District, we've got wonderful relationships with both TMCC and UNR. I meet on a monthly basis with both President Sandoval and Hilgersum, as well as our TRIO programs. So Gear Up and other types of programs to make sure that our first generation students have those opportunities and the scholarships available to them. We know that in this distance learning environment, especially in the hybrid, the FAFSA forms and making sure that our students and our families still have access to FAFSA forms and understanding all the intricacies of understanding, how to fill out those forms. So we will continue to make sure that we offer those types of opportunities. We have a newsletter that goes out to every single one of our families. So when we're talking about scholarship nights, when we're talking about having our counselors have that opportunity to engage with our families, especially our families of color and hard to reach families. Engaging our faith-based community and making sure that those trusting relationships are known to make sure that our families have that information. And then importantly, in different languages and not just in Spanish, but multilingual availability of information. We're not quite there yet. We want to get better at that and outreach efforts as well.
Follow up if I may, Chair.
Sure.
And was there any effort to ensure that students had access to like the TMCC, I think it's the Jumpstart program and programs like that, and maybe push towards getting some early college credits that could be paid for by the school district, AP classes, things like that? Was there any of that push? Because I'm just concerned that we know that gap time makes it significantly less likely that a student will go into higher education at all.
Well, actually, I'm really proud of our AP rates and where we are with advanced placement courses and that push in order to make sure that we have an equitable access task force with almost every single one of our high schools represented on that task force and removing barriers such as core requirements, classroom requirements, as far as prerequisite requirements. And we did a lot of that work last year around that. But AP honors courses, career technical education, and then, like I said, working closely with TMCC. Obviously, I would love to have the removal of any types of fees. And so we're working again with UNR, and that would really help us out as far as having additional funding for class fees. So fee structures within TMCC and UNR as well.
Thank you. And I did not ask my vice chair, Miller, if she had a follow-up question, and I believe that was my problem. So we'll hop back to you, Vice Chair.
Chair, I'll wait until let everyone else go, and now I'll go at the end if that works.
Okay, sure.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we will go to Assemblywoman Gorlow.
Thank you, Chair. And I want to go back to talking about the students that received the D and F grades for last semester. And I'm still really concerned about both the short-term and long-term ramifications on how that's going to be. Yes, we can do some credit makeups, but what about GPAs? How's that going to affect those students getting into college or applying for scholarships? So I still have questions about that. And then I'm also interested if Superintendent Jara, if you could also elaborate a little bit more about what those immediate academic supports that are in place and how they are different per level from elementary through middle to high school and different demographics. So Sorry, it's kind of a long question.
You are on mute, Superintendent.
Thank you. Great question, Assemblywoman Garlow. This is Superintendent Jara for the record. That's part of the plan that we.
You are on mute again, Superintendent.
Am I ready?
You are good to go.
Thank you. I apologize. Great question, Assemblywoman Garlow. What we're looking at right now is with our individual principals looking at their academic data up, and that's part of the plan that we are asking them to bring in small groups of educators on a voluntary basis. That is a 4 through 12, because we are extremely concerned as well for for all students, but especially our seniors, our juniors, for GPA perspective. So they're working right now. We sent I would tell you, we sent a guide this week, and that's what the principals are working on to bring back their students. So once we can get that to this body, once we have them, so you can see more strategic what schools are doing, because every school is going to be individual for the needs of their community.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll follow up later.
Okay, thank you. Next, we will go to Assemblywoman Nguyen.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Rochelle Nguyen. This message or this question and kind of comment is for Superintendent Jara. I'm new to the Education Committee, but I'm obviously not new to education. I am a parent and I have 2 children that are currently in the Clark County School District. And I recognize that this year has been a challenge, and the decisions that you all have to make are unimaginable. I know that we are doing it with other issues here in the state, including in education, but I know that you guys are also making those kind of difficult decisions. And I grew up with a bipolar mother, and so it breaks my heart to hear these issues, these tragic suicides with our Nevada children. And I think everyone does that. But I also think you probably appreciate that this is not a new issue in our state, and it's not something that we do need to do better. So I just wanted to start off. I know that you guys introduced some telemental health services, at least in the Clark County School District, that seem to be showing some initial success since they were introduced in the fall. So I appreciate some of those programs that you guys have chose and have been able to implement. So I'll just start there. This kind of gets to my question, though. I see, we're here meeting virtually because it is unsafe. We are in the middle of a global pandemic. Our governor has made a pause order. I know many school boards, most of them are still meeting virtually. And I recognize that we're not going to have something that makes everyone happy, and we all want to get back to a normal, or even a hybrid modified normal at this point. But having just recovered my entire family from COVID, and we masked and we did all the appropriate things, the kids haven't left our house in probably 12 months. I do have a fear, and hearing that we have educators who are so adaptable. And I know that my sister is a teacher, my mother-in-law was a teacher. They're always going to put their students before themselves. We see them in tragic shootings. We see them in the decisions that they make and the money they spend and the time that they do outside of their salaries and their personal lives. So I'm just it gives me huge concern with the difficulties and all Nevadans getting their vaccinations, that we are putting them in a situation where they have to choose between the health of themselves, their families, their communities, and going into the workplace. Because it sounds like the parents have a choice, like I have a choice to say, I want to stay and my kids are going to stay all virtual, but these teachers don't have that same kind of option. So I would hate for us to have another dashboard that's now collecting the deaths, related to families within the school district. So I was wondering, why there is a rush to do this. I think of this, if someone tests positive, you're shutting down the classroom for 2 weeks, and that seems to be even more disruptive for the learning process and for these teachers. So I'm just wondering, what are the contingency plans to deal with this moving into this hybrid model?
So,
thanks.
Thank you, Superintendent Jar, for the record, Assemblywoman Nguyen. One of the things that, and I'm going to go back into my opening or presentation. I didn't forget because I can't forget our ESCA partners because they have been from day one when we closed down our food service department, delivered they go close to 10 million meals, 9.8 million meals to this community. The heartbeat of our traditional schools have been as part of this community. One of the things that we have put in place is I would tell you in our partnership with all unions is really looking at the testing as one, the COVID testing as a mitigating strategy. And then also now partnering with the Southern Nevada Health District, partnered with the governor's office, meeting twice a week to try to get our adults go through the vaccines to make sure that we are safe. That is number one priority, is to make sure that the adults are safe. In the agreements that we haven't set, there is a voluntary, there is some mitigating strategy, not mitigating strategy, there's some, if you're susceptible population, then you can prove up and show not only through the ADA compliance, but then also there is that opportunity and that choice. When the data that we have seen to date, obviously practicing social distancing, we are still at the 6 foot because Dr. Legan, who the chief health officer here locally, has been very clear, 6 feet social distancing, won't move on that, which is the right thing. I trust, obviously, he's the expert, I'm not. I can teach kids, but I'm not the health expert. So we're partnering very closely with our health experts to make sure that we are safe when we come back. So we are, part of our agreements and with all unions have been that there's that they can demonstrate whether they're susceptible to some health factors that then we, obviously have that that choice to stay home. So we're working through that right now to make sure that the adults are safe for our children.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yes. I appreciate that we're trying to find solutions. I just have concerns. Like if you don't have underlying health conditions, like having gone through the COVID situation in my household, I don't have any underlying health conditions, but I can tell you it was a hellish 2 weeks. My father, who lives with us, has some underlying health conditions, and I wouldn't wish watching a family member struggle to breathe like I had to go through. And I will tell you that I also struggled because my 8-year-old daughter had symptoms and struggled with her COVID. So, and she can't get a vaccination. So while I also think that there needs to be an appreciation that even people without underlying health conditions can really suffer from this disease if they contract it. So I thank you, but I hope that is also part of the conversation too, is our kids can't get vaccinated, at least right now, and they also need to be protected as well.
Yeah, and thank you. And I'll just piggyback on Assemblywoman Nguyen. I personally don't have underlying health issues, but my husband sure does. And so that's another thing. You come home as a carrier. So I think this is an important conversation that needs to be had. And to call it a personal decision, but it's affects many families in many different ways. So thank you for sharing. And I know that you are being thoughtful of that, but we really want to make sure that teachers feel safe. We will move on to Assemblywoman Marzola.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Assemblywoman Elaine Marzola, Assembly District 21. This is a question for Superintendent Jara. In Clark County, what efforts has been made to make the reopening plans for non-English speaking families?
When you, Madam Chair, Assemblywoman Marzola, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Can you tell me what efforts has been made to make the reopening plans available for non-English speaking families?
So, Superintendent Jara, for the record, we are actually in the process. We just released our latest this week. We are in the process of translating into Spanish. The first few where obviously when we release them, it takes them some time to translate them in Spanish, which is the dominant language here in this community. We have made that available for their families. I have gone, I am bilingual, so I have done some town hall meetings in Spanish. I would say virtual meetings, not town hall face-to-face, but I have done some tele-town hall meetings in Spanish to explaining to our Spanish speaking community about our reopening plan.
When was the plan sent out for families in English?
I think it was sent out, I don't have it, it was probably sent out yesterday or 2 days ago.
Okay. Do you know, so for the Spanish speaking families, do you have a date when that's going to be sent?
My deputy superintendent, Madam Chair, is available, so she would be able, Dr. Larson Mitchell. She may have more details. Dr. Larson Mitchell.
Thank you. For the record, Brenda Larson Mitchell. The guide for really principals to really start implementing was released late Tuesday evening to principals. The plan that we released on November 14th, which is very similar to the plan that was released Tuesday, was translated and available to our Spanish speaking parents and families. And so as Dr. Jara mentioned, we are in the process right now of translating that, and will be out as soon as it can be available for our families.
You don't have a date as of yet?
I'm happy to follow up with you on a date.
Can you? And then would you be able to, would you also be able to send?
I was just going to say everything should go through the committee. So, but I believe you were going to ask for something additional, Assemblywoman?
Yeah, just when it's ready, if it can be sent to the committee.
Yeah, so once again, we'll have our, Ms. Robusto will follow up with you so we can get that, and we'll get that out to the committee. And I apologize, I still have several questions, but I just don't want to run out of time. I know some people have other committees after, so I'm going to go ahead and have do the Charter School Authority presentation quickly, and then we'll follow up with the last few questions as well. All right, so go ahead, Ms. Fiden.
Thank you. I am bringing this up on my screen, so hopefully you can confirm when you're able to see that. My name is Rebecca Fiden, for the record, Executive Director of the State Public Charter School Authority. And if you could just confirm you're seeing that on your end. Perfect. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for the opportunity to share today. Before I get into discussing the COVID-19 pandemic and the charter schools response, since this is the first time that I'm presenting to this committee, I do want to briefly provide some context about charter schools and the Charter Authority. Some of you may be familiar with charter schools and our agency, and others, this may be the first time you're having the chance to hear from us. So as you're likely aware, here we go. As you are likely aware, public charter schools are tuition free. They are open to all students and enroll students through a lottery process. They're required to take all state assessments. They're governed by volunteer boards of directors. They are forbidden from operating for profit, and they are subject to a performance contract with a charter school sponsor, such as the State Public Charter School Authority. Our agency, the State Public Charter School Authority, was created in 2011 to serve three primary purposes. First, to authorize charter schools of high quality. Second, to provide oversight to the schools that we sponsor. And third, to serve as a model of best practices for charter school sponsoring. Here are just some quick facts about our agency, and I'll breeze forward to talking more about our schools here. We have currently 67 charter school campuses. They are located across 5 counties. The majority of our schools are located in Clark County. And for context, we charter schools, State Public Charter School Authority sponsored charter schools serve approximately 11% of the state's total enrollment. So now I will get into the COVID-19 response, and hopefully that gives you a sense of our role, which is a little bit different from a traditional school district. The State Public Charter School Authority throughout the 2020-2021 school year has provided guardrails and oversight regarding in-person learning. Ultimately, our schools were able to make decisions about their instructional models within the guardrails that we set. And we did see a wide range of approaches, which I will talk through on the next slide. To give some background on these guardrails and oversight, in August, the authority put in place COVID-19 in-person learning guidance that limited in-person instruction to up to 25% of a school's enrollment if they were in a county that was flagged by the COVID-19 task force. Most of our schools in those flagged counties did in fact open the school year either fully virtual or with a very limited in-person instruction. As we got into September and October, those schools started bringing small groups of students back into their buildings, oftentimes prioritizing student groups such as special education students, English learners, or young learners in particular. And with this gradual increase, they had the opportunity to refine their processes and let staff and students adjust to this new normal, as we now like to call it. As we got into September and October, our agency continued to monitor what was going on in schools. We monitored the case rates, the test positivity rates, particularly through those first couple months of the school year. And we spent a lot of time talking to our school administrators and understanding what was working, what challenges they were having, and what they were seeing on the ground. And so in November, just at the beginning of the month, we did increase the limit from 25% up to 40%. And I want to note two things here. Keep in mind that throughout this period, all of our schools were subject to all of the emergency directives, just like other public schools in the state. As I mentioned earlier, schools had the option to provide in-person learning. Some chose to do that and some chose not to, or some chose to do it at a larger scale than others. And third, we did offer exemptions to those schools that could demonstrate a need for higher rates of in-person learning, as well as demonstrate strong safety measures. So with that in mind, our next board meeting is at the end of February. In our monthly board meetings, we regularly discuss the COVID-19 in-person learning guidance and continue to watch the numbers across the state very closely. And so we'll continue to do so and talk to our schools as we contemplate potential changes going into the springtime. In terms of oversight, the State Public Charter School Authority, as we began the summer and even through this year, has continued to review our schools' reopening plans to ensure compliance with NDE guidelines and state guidelines. We have also significantly changed our communication practices with schools, first to ensure that we are well informed about what is happening on our school sites every week. And second, to ensure that make sure that our schools have access to critical information and answers to questions that they may have, challenges they may face, issues that may arise. At the beginning of this, the communication was multiple times per week. We actually split the schools up across liaisons across our entire agency. And those liaisons were talking to our schools twice a week at the beginning. And now we've scaled back significantly, largely because things have become, changes happen a little bit less frequently than they did at the beginning. But we do maintain very regular communication with our schools to this day, and I expect throughout the remainder of this year. In terms of methods of instruction, so again, our schools do have a lot of flexibility in this front, and this slide shows the method for each school. This data is as of January 18th, and I believe there may be some changes that will be implemented in the next couple of weeks, but this data should be pretty darn close to accurate as of today. The vast majority, as you can see, are operating under a hybrid model, and that can look a lot of different ways. In some cases, it's alternating stays. Like Superintendent Jara talked about, one cohort comes in on Mondays and Tuesdays, one comes in on Thursdays and Fridays. There are some schools doing a half-day model, and then some are certain grade levels are coming into the school building while other grade levels are fully virtual. So there are a wide variety of hybrid models being used right now. We also have some schools that are doing what we refer to as targeted or limited in-person instruction, which is when a school brings some students in, but really on a limited basis and a very focused basis, less of a regular schedule with a lot of students and more on a targeted small group basis. To provide some details about how schools have been supporting students and families, first, I'll talk about safe reopening. Our schools and now our agency have, over the last 10 months become deeply familiar with the federal, state, and local guidance. In fact, we have on multiple occasions had local health officials join our calls with schools to help share information, answer questions, talk through scenarios and challenges. We've worked in close coordination with our local health authorities as they have developed their school response plans and ensured that there's smooth communication and processes for coordinating when there are potential issues. And in addition, we have, like all the other school districts, our schools have benefited greatly through the Task Force and Department of Emergency Management to have access to a significant amount of PPE to help to keep students and teachers safe. In terms of learning loss, we know that this is a real concern as we think about short and long-term impacts. Last summer, anticipating the need for this work, we initiated a 3-part training on instructional recovery so that even at that point back in the summer, we were starting to think about what this was, the impacts that this would have and how we could proactively address this. Many of our schools have continued some of that professional learning through some of the ESSER funds that were made available through the federal government. And we expect this will continue certainly into this coming summer and perhaps longer as well. Our schools continue to use school-based assessments that provide them with local data to assess student learning and figure out where they need to dig in and provide additional supports to students. And then we're also gearing up for state assessments and anticipate that these will provide really a broader view on the overall impact of the pandemic on student learning. Finally, moving on to student outreach, our schools have had a high rate of success in reaching students. Even back into the spring in 2020, we saw pretty good attendance and contact with our students, despite some of the initial challenges of transitioning to distance learning. In terms of addressing attendance issues, really, our schools have been focused on addressing root causes. We've seen many using their social workers and counselors to help work with students and families. Many have, with safety precautions, conducted home visits to check in on families that they have had a hard time getting in touch with. And then also supporting our students with internet and devices. With regard to technology, we have been able to work with our schools as well as partners such as the Governor's Office of Science, Innovation, and Technology to help to get devices and internet access to our students. And then briefly, I'll talk about funding. At this point, the SPCSA has seen an additional approximately $9.3 million in federal funds. You'll see the major uses highlighted here. And I don't think any of these are surprising, probably in line with many of the ways that school districts are using these funds as well. In terms of budget impacts, our agency reviews budget to actual reports for schools on a quarterly basis. We've seen mixed results on this front, and I think we'll continue to monitor. We have seen some schools with noticeably lower enrollment than they had originally projected. But that is limited to a subset of schools, not necessarily a trend across the entire 67 charter school campuses that we oversee. And then finally, here's just a quick summary of the supports that we've provided to our schools during the pandemic. We have a limited staff, as you may have saw on the stats page earlier, but we really have worked as much as we can to adapt our work and change our work to support our schools and their school communities throughout this challenge. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Chair Bilbray Axelrod, I believe that you are still muted.
And I was saying really amazing stuff. I'm so sorry you guys missed it. Okay, I think we'll just go ahead and go down the queue. So next is Assemblywoman Hardy.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to start off by thanking all of the presenters. You have had such a monumental undertaking since last March when schools, when this pandemic hit and we had to close schools and all of that. And so, I commend you on everything that you have done, that you did, that you have done, that you continue to do to help our students and our teachers. I just want to say thank you for all of your efforts. So I wanted to go back a little bit and talk about CCSD, just a couple questions. I think we all are aware that March 1st, they're going to open the pre-K through third grade and on these the cohorts like you explained here. So is there any timeline, like once that's done, is there any timeline for maybe then opening up higher grades? And what would that be based on? Or is it like we see how it goes for 2 weeks or a month and then we'll, open some other grades? Or is there any like definitive timeline or decisions? Would that be based on? Because then, you're almost getting into May when you're almost at the end of the school year. So I just wanted to find out if there had, been any thought or plans beyond the pre-K and third grade.
Superintendent Jar, for the record, Assemblywoman Hardy, we don't have a set timeline at this time. Our goal is, as we have seen across the state, I don't want to open too fast and then have to come back. So we're going to be really strategic and careful in how we open up other grade levels. There's a lot of things that I'll be candid with this body. There's a lot of things that are going to go into place because, as you know, we have assessments coming that have not obviously from the federal government and some federal requirements. So all of those things have to take into account as we look at what other grade levels. So we're having our conversations internally and starting to work with our bargaining units to see how that happens. Ideally, if I give you a timeline now, we look and see a couple, 2-3 weeks. Don't hold me to it. See how that goes, keeping the mitigation strategies, keeping our kids and our staff safe, and then potentially maybe my thinking right now is 4th and 5th. And then, seeing what my other colleagues across the state are doing and across the country, as Superintendent Mcneill mentioned, every Thursday I sit with the Council of Great City Schools, and I also sit on the National Superintendents Association Task Force on COVID-19.
Follow up, that's okay?
Sure.
Okay. I appreciate that. And I was encouraged by some of the other presenters and the way that they have been opening and handling their district. So I think that's encouraging information because, I can appreciate we all have our families, we have our situations, we want people to be safe. And, but we also want our kids to learn. We want for their mental, emotional health as well and their academic success. So I hope that you will keep us updated as March 1st comes. And I believe I understand that some of this is a parent's choice. Like if a family doesn't feel comfortable sending them back or they have the ability to have them at home. Is that correct?
Superintendent Jar, for the record, Assemblywoman Hardy, yes, parents have a choice to keep their kids to distance education, and that's something that we're looking at for next year as well. Parents are going to want to have that opportunity, so we're strengthening our distance education program as well.
Okay.
Thank you, Superintendent. Next, we will go to Assemblywoman Torres.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I echo the sentiments of others. Thank you for all the heavy lifting that you've been doing, and we do appreciate you. This committee in the 2019 session considered a bill on distance learning, and the discussion was around weather, snow days, other kinds of hazards, breakdowns of even equipment, HVAC units, and so forth that would lead to circumstances that wouldn't be healthy for students to operate in until they got fixed. At the time, we never predicted that there would be a pandemic, but it certainly begs the question, hindsight being 2020, wish we could have gone further with that bill, but we're under the governor's executive orders right now in a declared emergency that's given you the flexibility you needed to be able to implement all this distance learning. I guess my question is there something that this body needs to consider in the long run for future, once we are no longer in a declared emergency, that would give you the statutory requirements that you need to be able to be flexible in addressing distance learning needs down the road.
And if I may go first, and I know my colleagues who are also, Superintendent Jar, for the record, I know my colleagues who are also here with us this afternoon. And I'm going to put a plug in for, I know what the state superintendent is working on with the Blue Ribbon Commission. I think one of the things that in expanding our competency base that we already have as a state, I know that she will be bringing, the department will be bringing in some of those recommendations that I would encourage this body to look at, because I think the flexibility is going to be the key.
Go ahead, Superintendent.
No, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Assemblywoman Torres. And as you know,
Please identify yourself for the record.
Kristen Mcneill, Superintendent of Washoe County School District. So within Washoe, obviously, we've had just recently snow days. And, I know that we have worked very closely with the Nevada Department of Education, because this is a huge concern. It would be very nice to be able to turn those days, instead of using our contingency days at the end of the year, to be able to have a full distance learning type model. And so I appreciate that question. And I think this is part of what the silver lining, if you will, as far as everything that we are learning in this global pandemic, as we move forward with education and down this pathway. And competency-based education is going to be one of those areas. And being able to have a child complete a course at mastery level and then move into the next course. And so having that opportunity, that we don't have to use contingency days, that we can just kind of keep moving down this pathway, I think is, one of the areas that we need to be looking at. And I appreciate that. The Blue Ribbon Committee, we have a representative on there as well too. So just the opportunity to look at education, not within seat time, and not in the structure and the confines of 180 instructional days. What else can we be able to do as we get out of the pandemic?
Thank you, Superintendent. Did any other folks want to speak on that? I'm not seeing any hands going up. So I will move to my Vice Chair, Assemblywoman Miller.
Chair, are you asking me for a question from the previous presentation or for this one?
Was that from the previous one?
It was because you moved us to the next item. I honestly think all of the questions have really already been addressed. Although I suppose I could ask one just for a little more clarification. One of our colleagues just asked a question about the choices for the students and families to be able to make those choices. And again, I feel like not to make this about CCSD, but because this is the district that is actually transitioning right now while the others already have, about giving the parents and that are concerned choices on whether or not they want to physically send their students back to school or keep them at home and continue their education virtually. But how does that look when it comes to staffing? Because again, there's been discussion and communication about educators having the choice and who's able to. And so what will happen if there's a difference in between the number of students that want to return versus the number of teachers that are able to return physically?
Superintendent Jar, for the record, Assemblywoman Miller, great question. Something that early data that we have just received, looking at it now, and you're right, and more kids than teachers, right? And that's a conversation, and that's where we're looking at the partnership between our administrators and our teachers to look and see where we can make sure that we have enough adults. One of the things that we're going to continue, we have in our agreement, is that emergent issues come up, we have to then come to the table together and find a solution. So I don't have total numbers in totality right now across all schools. The principals that I've had conversations anecdotally, again, have been that we have seen that we have enough teachers for the pre-K right now. The challenge, and I'll just, one of the concerns that we have right now is that, especially for graduation requirement, is ACT. That is a graduation requirement. And there is some concern that we may not have enough proctors. So that's one of the things that we have to come to the table and have some conversations around, because it is a graduation requirement. We have to offer it. That's where we have to do what's best for the children. And that's what we will do.
Follow-up, Chair?
Sure.
Thank you. And Dr. Jara, again, as we've been speaking, even as you mentioned ACT testing, obviously these are extraordinary times. So extraordinary measures and exceptions and requests and, whatever we can do to make sure that our students graduate. But I want to follow up on a question that was asked earlier as well, which was, what if, when students do return physically and if there is another outbreak, and it didn't seem that there was a clear protocol yet on how it would be handled. What is the protocol if there is an outbreak? Especially, I think one of the things that's unique to CCSD, more so than any of our other districts, is that, and I don't want to say, because I know in the rules we have students that travel long distances to get to their schools, but in CCSD itself, especially if you're looking at the majority of the valley, our students don't necessarily attend school, just their neighborhood kind of zone schools. We have students in magnets all over the district. We have students that go from Summerlin to Green Valley. They drive, they bus all the way down to Rancho. There's choice, so they, one household could have their 3 or 4 kids in, schools all across the valley, which again becomes a concern if there is an outbreak, because now it's not just trying to contain in our community. I have to consider that how many of my students actually are living 20 miles away, and then, where a fan out of this one household could have one kid going to school in Green Valley area, another in the Summerlin area, another in, West Las Vegas. So is there plans in place for those protocols, and what can parents expect and what can educators expect? And, in terms of the notification and what the protocol will be, and will it be one classroom or the whole building? Do we have secure plans on that yet?
Superintendent Job, for the record, yes, we do have our plans on our protocols following our contact tracing, following the Southern Nevada Health District guidelines. And this is part of where I really appreciate the governor's leadership and the state superintendent, where we're meeting. We met yesterday, we met Monday, we're meeting again tomorrow, to make sure that our plans, the good thing is that I know that Superintendent Mcneill and my colleagues have been doing this, and this is where we're learning from them, because they have been doing the contact tracing, and some of those measures that obviously a little bit unique for Clark, but they're the same thing. So what I would tell you is that the partnership, not only from the state's emergency team, but then also the Southern Nevada, and then lining up ours, is going to be able to address that. So we do have to get into, obviously, the conversation about, we're going to need more contact tracing than my colleague in the north, because we have a little bit more schools up. And that goes back to what Assemblywoman Hardy mentioned. We have to learn and get better with the 232 elementary schools before we expand to some of our other schools. But those plans are in place. We're tightening up. We got 23 days.
Thank you, Dr. Jara.
Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a few questions. I was going to look around and see if other folks had a question. It looks like I just got a message from Assemblywoman Hanson. Can you just raise hands if there's anybody else? And if not, then I'm going to go after Assemblywoman Hanson and ask my questions. Anybody else? All right, go for it.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate this second chance in the right segment. I was curious, and this is a question for the Charter School Authority. We heard from Superintendent Fecht with Pershing County that they had a drop, in enrollment because of the homeschooling choice of 5 to 7%. I'm curious if you've seen a drop or an increase in your enrollment in the charter schools.
Thank you for the question, Rebecca Fiden, for the record. It's honestly been varied from school to school. In some cases, we have seen, I think, 5 campuses we've noted that they are less than 80% of their projection for the year, whereas we have some schools that have been right on track with their projection or within range and slightly over. Some of it has to do with local circumstances. For example, some of our schools up in Washoe County, where elementary school has been largely in person this year, have smaller campuses, and we have had some guardrails in place that they have felt like they've had families saying, well, we want to go to the Washoe County School District because our kid can go every day. And so we've actually seen it go in both directions. And I think it's a reflection of the reality. I think that many of you have shared today that many of these decisions are personal for many people. And I think, I've said repeatedly to my board, like, I wish there was a good one single right answer. And unfortunately for every family, every person, many times these are just personal decisions. And we see that reflected in the data that we see where our schools are varied from campus to campus and county to county.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for that answer, Rebecca.
I will actually keep you, Ms. Fiden. So I'll start my questions with you. Since your charter schools have such a diverse plans, I know some of them down south began the beginning of the year fully in person. From what I understand, maybe not even fully socially distancing, but just kind of, went full bore. Then we have others that have incrementally opened in some ways. Have you seen, has there been an issue with spikes in COVID, and what is your protocol when that does happen?
Thank you for the question, Rebecca Fiden again for the record. So the beginning of the year, we limited in-person enrollment to 25%, which was, for example, the state's directives have tended to be at 50% capacity of every space. So we actually had more significant limitations in place than the state directives at the beginning of the year, and continue to this day, with a couple of exemptions that have been granted beyond that in unique circumstances. To your question around protocols and spikes that we've seen, we have worked very closely with the Southern Nevada Health District as well as the Washoe County Health District. Both of them published school response guidance documents, and we were part of the development of those documents, as well as brought experts from their agencies to talk to our schools about those response plans. And so those go into very high levels of detail about, if there's a case, what is the protocol, how does the contact tracing work? And then we also ensure that schools report to us when there is a case at one of their campuses. And we keep track of those as well and ensure that they've contacted the health district. So we're really, that oversight piece, I think, on our end has been, we've made sure to keep very close communication with our schools to make sure we know what's going on. In terms of your question of spikes, we have not seen huge spikes in any campuses. And I will tell you, one of the things that gives me the most confidence is I think our schools have done a great job responding. For example, in November, at the end of November, even though we had just in early November when things were looking up, actually given some more flexibility and increased our limit from 25 to 40%, in late November, numbers started to increase. Schools were worried about Thanksgiving and community and family gatherings. And several of our schools actually pulled back right after Thanksgiving and returned to either lower in-person learning or full distance learning for a period of time to actually ensure that those types of incidents didn't happen. We saw schools that saw, they had been seeing one case every couple of weeks and all of a sudden saw 2 cases in the same week and said, we're not going to risk it. And so I think our schools have been really thoughtful and cautious in the ways that they've responded. And we appreciate, I can't say enough for the work of our health districts. We would be really in tough shape without all the support that they've provided us, and they've been available around the clock to help, really, if any questions or issues come up.
Thank you for that. And just to follow up on that, how do you deal with teachers who might not feel comfortable going back to my colleague, Assemblywoman Miller brought up, I believe it was you, Assemblywoman Miller, or might have been Wynn, about not wanting to go into the classroom. Is that a decision that they are able to make themselves, or are you in that position?
Rebecca Fine for the record. Thank you again for the question. Ultimately, each of our schools' volunteer governing boards make the decision about the instructional model for their campus within our guardrails. And so many of those decisions are made locally. We've said really repeatedly from the beginning that schools should be doing this work of reopening in partnership with their teachers, their families, their school communities. And so really encourage that. I have gotten a couple of phone calls, and we've been made aware of a couple of situations where there have been some concerns by a teacher, and by and large, I don't think there are any outstanding. At this point, we've been able to work through all of those. And I do think our schools have been very responsive to their families and their teachers. They all offer families, even if they're doing some hybrid learning, the option to be fully virtual, and have certainly worked with their teachers to make sure that teachers feel safe. I can certainly identify a couple of schools that the driving force behind them staying so limited in person or staying virtual is they have a lot of teachers who aren't comfortable, and they have decided that they really want to make sure that teachers are part of that decision point. And so that's one of the challenges that our schools have had to face when they've thought about increasing in-person instruction is, do we have enough staff that feel like they want to come back at this point?
Appreciate that. My last question is, I think we've sort of talked about how students have moved on. Sometimes we see them going to private schools that are meeting every day. But as the virtual learning starts to go away and we start to see more in person, are we anticipating that we're going to then have a matriculation back into public schools? Are we capturing those folks? Are we able to know? And I believe that it's, from what you said, it's voluntary, right? So some people, if families want to have virtual or hybrid, are we including those folks who, like I said, might have gone away from their traditional public school because of, for whatever reason, that that they want their kids or they have to have their kids in person? And whoever can take this.
Dr. Jar, I don't know if you want to speak to what you've seen in Clark County, but certainly I think it's quite possible we'll see some changes. And I know some of our schools have expressed concern about, well, this school down the street is going to go hybrid and we're worried they're going to draw our kids away. And, we haven't actually seen that play out necessarily. I think a lot of our families are confident with the community and the school community they're part of. But I think, certainly it's something that we're all worried about. And Dr. Jar and I have done our best to stay in close communication to help to avoid any issues between our schools.
Madam Chair, Superintendent Jar, for the record, as Ms. Feider mentioned, the constant communication is critical. One of the things that we're having conversations around is the potential of an increase with our current student population. Actually, and we're learning from my colleagues, is that parents may decide, well, is it safe yet with distance ed? And as they start seeing that it is safe, we're going to potentially see an increase of our current students. So we're taking all of that into account now, and have to be, I said it from day one, flexibility, patience, and grace are going to be critical as we close out the year and get ready to open up in August. But we are paying attention and making sure that we stay flexible for those issues that you're addressing.
I apologize. I'm going to ask one more question and then that's it. You had, in the very beginning of your presentation, the issue of busing came up. And how I think it went from 76 to 28. There shouldn't be a lack of buses, correct? Because we have buses that aren't active for junior highs and high schools, the like. Is where's the disconnect? Is it money because we have to have more? I'm not seeing the correlation on where the challenge is. If you could help me.
So, Madam Chair, Superintendent Jar, for the record, I'm seeing as we grow to a full, when we get to a K-12 eventually.
Okay.
Because we do have a shortage of bus drivers. So right now with pre-K3, we may not.
Okay. Okay. That was my confusion. All right. Okay. Thank you. All right. We are at 3:47. I know most of us have 4 o'clock committee meetings, so I'm just going to do a real quick check to see if anybody else has a question that they're just burning, and I don't see any hands. So I think I'm going to thank you all for your presentations. Very informative. I know almost everyone has thanked you for your hard work, but believe it, we all realize that this is an unprecedented time for all of us, and we appreciate your hard work and flexibility and being nimble. And so thank you for your presentations today, and thank you for getting the information that my committee members have asked for, and we look forward to working together this legislative session. Okay. All right. And with that, we are going to move on to public comment. Please remember to clearly state and spell your name and limit your comments to 2 minutes. Staff will be timing each speaker during public comment to make sure everyone is given a fair opportunity to speak. Staff in our broadcast and production services, please add the first caller with public comments to the meeting.
Thank you, Chair. We have one caller and they are unmuting now. Caller with the last 3 digits of 577. Slowly state and spell your name for the record. You have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon. Chris Daly, CHRISDALY, Nevada State Education Association. NSEA represents a majority of educators across the state, with members in every Nevada school district, including teachers, other licensed education professionals, and education support professionals who provide vital services to students in Nevada's public education system. In NSEA's 120-year history, there have been few more challenging times than the one we find ourselves in right now with the COVID-19 pandemic. We appreciate the work of this committee and the legislature during this time of crisis. After school buildings were ordered closed last spring, NSEA members quickly responded, with classroom teachers engaging their students in distance learning and food service workers on the front lines providing meals to families in our districts. This semester, our members are responding in a diversity in their district and the status of the COVID-19 crisis in their community. Some educators are back at their school building offering in-person instruction. Others are working in hybrid models, juggling in-person learning with distance learning opportunities. Many others, including, as you heard, in Clark County, are working to create meaningful education experiences through full-time distance learning. Last summer, NSEA supported the work of the Department of Education to develop Nevada's path forward, a framework for safe, efficient, and equitable return to school buildings. We felt this was the proper framework, along with consultation with local health districts, to safely reopen and operate school buildings this school year. Educators, as much as anyone else, appreciate the importance of returning to school for in-person learning. Distance education is not an ideal replacement for classroom learning for most educators and students, and educators are concerned about the impact of COVID-19 crisis is having on education equity. Top concerns with full distance learning include providing the same level of education for all students, the complexity of teaching students with disabilities, and absenteeism. Also, most educators find distance learning and especially hybrid models more difficult, with more time required to teach the same lessons. However, educators have also been very concerned about their health and the health and well-being of their students. NSEA has consistently raised concerns that districts lack the resources needed to follow the recommendations to safely open and operate school buildings during this pandemic, and we continue to advocate for the additional resources. Yes?
Okay, if you could just start to wrap it up. We are at 2 minutes.
Okay, that's fine. I submitted my comments in writing. We look forward to working with the committee on all of the challenges ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Daly. I appreciate it. Okay, and with that, I am going to give a shout out to our counselors once again. I know we did on Tuesday, but this is Counselor Week. And Assemblywoman Torres has pointed out that Leanne Mangai is Nevada Counselor of the Year. So want to give her a shout out and congratulations for all you do. So thank you everyone for this meeting, and we'll see you next on Tuesday. Thank you very much, everyone. Oh.